Hello and welcome to Working Historians, a podcast series where we discuss what historians do with their lives. I am Rob Denning, Associate Dean for Liberal Arts for Southern New Hampshire University's online history programs. Today's episode is a recording of another event in the Southern New Hampshire University History Speaker Series, which brings together professional historians, students, faculty, and staff to talk about research projects, new publications, and history-related careers. At this event, José Peláez discusses his research and his experience transitioning from the online Master of Arts degree program in history at SNHU to an in-person doctoral program in history at the Université du Québec à Trois-Rivières. My French is awful, so I apologize for that if I just massacred it. Additional topics for discussion will include the decision to pursue a doctoral degree in the first place, applying to programs, expectations of students in doctoral programs, and strategies for researching and writing history. Let's check it out. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I am Rob Denning. I'm the Associate Dean of Liberal Arts for Southern New Hampshire University. I oversee the online master's and bachelor's level history programs here at SNHU. And welcome to today's event in the History Speaker Series. Today, I have the pleasure of talking to José Peláez, and we're a bit about what it's like to be a PhD student in history. José was a student here at SNHU for the master's degree program in history, and after graduation, he successfully applied to and is now attending the Université du Québec à Trois-Rivières. I hope I got that right that time.
Very good.
Close enough. We'll take it. So today we're going to talk a bit about the transition from an online master's program to an in-person doctoral program, and all of the kind of what the lifestyle of that is like, and how we got there, and all of that fun stuff. So, José, just to get this started here, can you tell us a bit about your background? How did you choose to go into the history field, and what attracted you to the field of history, and then we'll kind of go into some details about your experiences.
Very good. So, good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Denning, for this opportunity to participate in this speaker series, and thank you all for attending. So, José Peláez. I'm Colombian. I've been in Canada for 21 years. I've always been passionate about history. I really hesitated between pursuing a history education or an industrial engineering. And at the time, I chose industrial engineering, but always kept reading and being a history aficionado, very passionate about history. And it was really the COVID pandemic that really forced me to kind of look at my bearings and really look for the opportunity to give the historian in me an opportunity. So I fortunately was very, very lucky to find the online program at SNHU, which really, really allowed me to continue my career. I'm an auditor in the tire industry. I verify the quality of truck retread tires, and while continuing my career, I was able to complete my online master in history at SNHU. I really enjoyed the experience. Fantastic. You're doing it, or most of you may be pursuing this program. Excellent quality of professors, the learning management system, the quality of the materials. I really enjoyed my experience. And then from there, I really, really feel that I have been giving my historian person with myself, a real good chance of pursuing this as a parallel career, or eventually changing really from the current field of work that I have into a full-time academic type of work in history. Also, I enjoyed so much the program at SNHU, and I really enjoyed how I saw from different professors that they could have other careers while being teachers at with the online program. So that for me would be an ideal scenario in the future to be able to join the faculty at SNHU. Most of the professors, if not all, are already doctors. Just one was advancing his PhD. So that made me clear in my willingness to pursue a PhD. I wanted to combine the previous experience once I graduated. I wanted to have an in-person experience to combine it to complement my experience at SNHU. And I was looking at different universities in Quebec. The Université du Québec at Trois-Rivières is close to where I live. It's the largest francophone university in North America. It's part of the Université du Québec network of universities. There's one in every major city in the province of Quebec. So it's the largest network of francophone universities. And it allowed me the flexibility to continue my work, my current career as an auditor, while combining in-person classes with remote or virtual follow-ups with my director. So it allowed me the flexibility to continue my career while slowly reinventing myself into a historian. And so far, it's been very enjoyable.
That's great. I'm glad that it's working out, especially with the location and all that. I think that's obviously very helpful for. This will be an interesting conversation because your experiences in Quebec are going to be a bit different from the experiences of a lot of PhD students in the United States. It's interesting to hear that you are able to still have kind of your day job, so to speak, while working on your PhD. Generally, in the United States, you're not allowed to have a day job because they consider the PhD to be that's your life, and it's meant to, like it or not. That's just kind of the way it is. It's kind of intended to be a very immersive experience where you're basically in it 24. And there's actually a lot of clauses in many PhD contracts that say you cannot have any outside employment or you'll get booted from the program. So it's interesting, and that's always been a problem because that creates a situation where if you can't work, then you're dependent on student loans, and it really contributes to kind of a lot of the student loan crisis that we've kind of been dealing with in the United States. Which so it's an interesting kind of comparison to see to know that in Canada you're able to it's not quite the same, and that. Depending on the student, that's definitely going to be for the best. And so that's great to hear. So can you tell us a little bit about, because again, we've got a bunch of students here. We've got students, I invited students from the BA program and the MA program. I'm not sure how many folks in the crowd here are in the MA versus the BA, so I'm not sure how many are trying to make this decision. But presumably most probably are, otherwise why would you be here? But I'm curious what pushed you or what was going through your mind when you were kind of weighing the decision for a PhD? You mentioned that that you've had this passion for history, and was there and that your ultimate goal is that you're going to be part of academia. So tell us about the transition from how things are different in what the expectations of you are from an MA versus a PhD program.
Very good. So I wanted to have an experience where I could have more time to read and reflect and less deliverables on such a tight schedule, which is the life of the master in history. You really have to be really, really organized with your time and to be able to meet all the requirements. I want to have a little bit of a different experience, and so far this is what I am having. Lots of reading time, lots of time to reflect, and fewer papers, fewer deliverables, but of course a lot more requirement in terms of the quality and the level of thought that I have to put into those deliverables. So it's been going well. Uh, really, really a lot of reading and a lot of time to reflect, and that's one expectation that I was, or one expectation that I was looking for, and it's been the case. With the online, with the physical or on in-person classes, uh, there are more type of seminars or workshops where we discuss different history lenses, kind of the historical lenses course that we took in the master, with discussion and facilitation by professors. And at the end, we have to uh, further along or progress in our reflection for our dissertation. So it's been a good combination between the uh, time to read, time to reflect, with some in-person contact, and it's been a good balance. And it definitely has allowed me to accommodate with my day job. It is not all the universities in Canada that allow this, so that's why I was looking for a PhD program that was very flexible. So it's very rare. It's not the majority of universities do not offer this type of accommodation. So it's kind of a unique possibility that I found at this university.
And so when you were originally thinking about applying for a PhD program, did you just have this one school in mind, or did you apply to a variety of schools?
I was looking at different schools in Quebec, and really this was perhaps the only one that allowed a flexible schedule like I needed. So many other ones really required, as you mentioned, Dr. Denning, uh, almost a in residence uh, permanent presence, and which is a significant source, can be a significant source of stress, because then if you're not able to earn a livelihood, then you're really in a tight situation, to depend on loans and financial debt, etc., which is not the stress that I wanted to be in having. I wanted to have an enjoyable experience and balance both worlds. So it's a very unique arrangement that I was able to find in this university.
That's great. And so Jules actually has an interesting question in the chat. Where did you pursue a fellowship for funding for your program? Now, I don't know how Canadian schools work. Do they have what type of funding did they offer, or are you completely going to be self-paid since you're working a day job?
I am completely self-paid,
Okay.
and I was fortunate to receive, because of my grades at the master as SNHU, the good grades, I was able to qualify for a fellowship, I think is the word, which actually is paying 80 or 90% of my program. So it paid to do well at the master, because otherwise I will not have qualified for that fellowship. But otherwise I would have had to pay with my own salary. So I think it will last until maybe the 80 or 90% of my semesters. But most of the students in the university, because they are full-time students, even colleagues of mine that are really fully dedicated to the PhD, they are really depending on several fellowships that are available, that require really to demonstrate that the student is really in a tight financial situation. So there's a lot of scrutiny, but there are lots of funds available. So my take on this is, if somebody wants to study a PhD, it seems that we're very few applicants. There will be a way to get it, to complete it, and you just have to know where to ask for help. And I've seen there are many options here in Canada for students that really need the funds.
And do they, because the way it generally works in the U.S. is that if PhD students generally will get fee waivers. So there's no tuition. And generally in the U.S., if you don't get some sort of a scholarship or fellowship, then you would get what's called a teaching assistantship, where you would teach a class and get paid a pretty minimal amount for it, but you get paid for teaching that class. And then the expectation is generally that that's what students would survive on. It's usually a pretty small amount. Back in my day, 20 years ago, it was $1,000 a month, which was not very, sustainable. So I did end up having to go with some student loans. But generally, though, in the U.S., the better programs are going to waive their tuition for you and provide some sort of a teaching assistantship, like I said. But there are also a lot of folks in the U.S., especially folks that are retired that want to do a PhD for their own personal interests, who will be self-pay, and they'll just cover their own costs, but they'll just pay the regular tuition for it. Let's see, while we're on the topic of kind of the initial application process, Will has a question. Did you have any issues during the application process coming from an online master's program with an unrelated undergrad degree? He also got his undergrad in engineering and is worried about not having in-person research experience. So your undergrad was different from your master's. So how did that work out? Were there any hiccups, or did the application process go pretty smoothly?
Fortunately, I had an MBA prior to my an MBA in Master in Business Administration prior to my master, so that fulfilled the requirements for the application at SNHU. So that it was a very fortunate thing that I had that master. Otherwise, I think I would have had to take some appointment courses at SNHU. So that would not have deterred me from pursuing the master, but it really helped to get the MBA. In terms of applying to the PhD, there were some universities that really required both a bachelor in history and a master in history, with also the requirement of a in residence 24-hour availability for the PhD. There were others more flexible. One of them, the Université du Québec at Trois-Rivières, they fully recognized my online degree, and no problems in the application. The key point there was to have a topic, an idea of a topic of research, a question of research, and to find among the faculty of the PhD program a person that could be interested in this. So no issues with my online degree, fully recognized.
Yeah, that's good to hear, and that is generally the case in the U.S. also. Is that if your undergraduate degree is not in history and you want to go into a PhD program for history, it is more difficult if you don't get the MA first. A lot of folks in the U.S. who go into I don't have any statistics in front of me, but a lot of students will go directly from the BA program to a PhD in history. And the first 2 years of the PhD program are basically earning an MA. And so you'll get your MA after your first 2 years. And then as soon as you finish the MA, you just go straight into the PhD stuff. Or you could get your MA somewhere else, like at SNHU, and then apply to get the PhD and then go to a PhD program. That's the route I went. I did the BA and MA at one school, and then I went to a different school for my PhD. All of my degrees were in history, so it didn't really make any difference to me. But generally, yeah, if your undergrad degree is not in history, you probably are going to struggle a bit if you apply directly to PhD programs in history, because you're going to have a deficit, because you're going to have to make up your research skills and all of that. So generally, if your undergrad degree is outside of history, it's probably a good idea to get an MA in history somewhere if you want to go into a PhD program in history, just so that you can show that you do have some background in history, so that you can hit the ground running without having to go make up any stuff. So same general concept, but yeah, if you've got an undergrad degree in something else, probably is a good idea to try to get the MA in history first and then go to the PhD program. So yeah, that's generally the way it'll work here too. So there's a similarity there also. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the funding. We talked a little bit about and like you said, it was good to hear that the online degree didn't really affect you. And that's another question that I get all the time, of course, being part of the online program is, is this going to be a mark against me when I go to apply to other stuff? And yeah, Jose is shaking his head, and I agree, it's not. Because in this day and age, post-COVID, online is just it's an indisputable it's part of the landscape now. It's part of the academic landscape that you just can't, nobody can ignore it anymore. You can't, if you're going to be snooty enough to say that I'm not going to accept any degree from an online program, you're just not going to be very successful. And of course, also in SNHU, of course, it never actually says online anywhere on your on your diploma or anything. So it's kind of a moot point, I suppose. But it is not an obstacle or a handicap if you're going to go into a PhD program from an online MA program. So good. So we talked a little bit about the application, a little bit about the transition here. Let's talk a little bit about your research. Now, when you were working on your capstone project at SNHU, are you going to continue on with that research as part of your dissertation in your doctoral program, or how are you going to move on to something else?
Thank you for the question. So I was investigating how the peripheries, meaning centers of a smaller power like the Caribbean countries such as Colombia, where I come from, were involved or influence reciprocally processes such as, for example, the independence of the United States. So my dissertation or my capstone project for the master was how the American independence was facilitated by the Bourbon alliance between the French Bourbon monarchy and the Spanish Bourbon monarchy, and how through this alliance France was able to tap into the resources of the Spanish Empire, particularly Mexican silver and also cattle and also foodstuffs, and how those were able to be directed at the critical juncture in time for the Yorktown siege to be completed. So it was a very interesting topic, and I wanted to continue in that vein for the PhD. Similarly, how the different peripheries were affected or reciprocally influenced key processes in the United States. And then I found in a very interesting visit that I did in 2022 to the Smithsonian Museum of History, a very nice exhibit about the Monroe Doctrine. And I thought to myself, this is exactly the type of topic that I want to pursue, something that can be looked at from different perspectives, from the different countries involved, the United States, Britain, France, Spain, and the peripheries. And from there, I formulated a topic where I was asking to myself, how was the Monroe Doctrine received by the peripheries, and if there was any influence back to the processes in the United States. And from there, I was able to get the interest of one professor at the Université du Québec, who she's we call them here in Canada Americanists, or researchers specialized in the history in the United States and how that history is seen from different countries. So I was able to get her interest, and from there, preparing to present my request for admission at the university, I learned that there was actually a reciprocal influence between the peripheries and the processes in the United States, especially in the year 1826 with the Panama Congress. There was a lot of debate, very heated debate in the American Congress on whether or not to send delegates to that Congress. And that was a little bit of a key milestone in the very slow divisions that ultimately led to the galvanization of different political fields that eventually were challenging each other in the American Civil War. So that was a little bit of a moment where the two-party systems in the United States were galvanized against each other because with the different interests between the North and the South. And the Grand Colombia, the country that group at the time, Panama, Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, with association with Bolivia and Peru, were the promoters of that Congress, and by doing so, that created a big tension in the United States. And as part of those years, there was the interest of maintaining the status quo in Cuba. Everybody was interested in keeping Cuba in the hands of Spain. Nobody wanted to change it. Nobody wanted Cuba to change hands. And at some point in time, Colombia, or Grand Colombia, because its independence was still not being recognized by Spain, threatened with an armada to liberate Cuba with Mexico, and that really created a big reaction in the United States, because they didn't want. There was many interests in Cuba, from the southern slave holders to financiers in Rhode Island. Everybody had interest in Cuba, so they really wanted for it to be kept in Spain's Spanish hands. So through the exploration of the topic, I found that there was another moment in time. One was the American Revolution. There was another moment in time, 50 years later, where there was a lot of connections between the centers of power, the United States, Britain, Spain, France, and the peripheries. And there were many processes and situations that really influence each other. And that's where I'm working on. So very fascinating. And I was able to get the interest from my director. And that's what I'm reading, and that's where I'm working on. And it's been a great process of discovery.
That's a really cool topic, and we could probably spend the next hour talking about that. Well, you've lived your life, you've devoted your life to this, so we could talk about it for months, I'm sure. There's actually two thoughts that this kind of sparked in me. One is that the choice of topic is very important during the initial application process, because part of the application process for PhD programs, I'm guessing it sounds like it's probably the same where you are, but it's definitely the way it is in the US, is that when you apply to a PhD program, you have to identify what you're going to research, what your topic's going to be, because you're going to get assigned to a professor at that university who's going to serve as your mentor / advisor / whatever you want to call it. And so generally the way it works is that they'll receive a big stack of applications, and each professor will start looking through it, and they'll say, oh, this one looks really interesting. And so I will kind of basically sponsor this person to come into the program, and I will be that person's advisor. So it has to connect with a specific person. Like at SNHU, you're never really attached to a specific professor in an MA program or even in a BA program. It's just, do you meet the minimum GPA, do you check all the right boxes? Boom, you're in. Whereas if you're applying to a PhD, you have to basically somebody there kind of has to champion for you in this big pile of applications. And so you need to be very clear about what your research is going to be, because that's are going to decide whether they want to, sponsor you or not. Sponsor is not the technical word for it, but if they're going to, if you're going to become that person's advisee. And so you have to be very clear. Now, in an MA program, usually students come in without really much of a sense of what their capstone projects be. They probably won't decide on it maybe till partway through the program or towards the end of the program. But for a PhD program, you really should have a good sense at the very outset what you're going to be studying. Now, it's possible it may change later once you're in, and maybe you'll get switched to a different advisor. Who knows? It depends on what the availability is. But there is you do need to know ahead of time what you're going to be focusing on, and you had a pretty good base on that already. And that's great that you basically sounds like you found somebody at that school kind of picked up on that, and now you're working with that person. And so that was first thing that we didn't really talk about when we talk about the initial application process is you got to be clear about what type of stuff you want to focus on. And then the is amazing. It's spanning all these peripheral areas, which is really cool because that stuff does tend to get forgotten in kind of the overall Revolutionary War. Yeah, they'll talk about France kind of coming in, swooping in, and helping out, but they don't really talk about all the logistics behind that, and that all comes from the colonies and the peripheries and all of that. So, what's your how are you going to do the research on this? Is this going to involve a bunch of research trips to all these different peripheral former colonies, or do you already have a cache of documents?
Very good. So far, I was able to read the material through secondary sources. I'm working on my historiography essay to really take a pulse of the landscape of what has been written about this. And I've been able to find this through either online resources or through the university. I have been able to connect with different universities throughout the world and get documents that are not available online to really get samples of what has been written about this topic, for example, in Cuba in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on and so forth. So I'm still at a point where I'm working on that historiography essay. And what I have found is that there's really a big evolution. There is a conservative historiography in the United States that tends to portray the Monroe Doctrine or the United States as protectors of the peripheries. They do not mention much about the maintenance of the status quo in Cuba, and that the Monroe Doctrine was really helpful for the independence movements. But after that, mostly recently, but already from the 1960s, there is a reaction or a revisionism of that historiography, where it really criticizes the role of the United States in that time and portrays the United States as hegemonic, protecting the status quo in Cuba, with all the repercussions that created in terms of a second slavery system in Cuba after industrialized sugarcane production, etc. So it really covers that role of the United States. And similarly, in Spain and France, there are different historiography trends. And it appears that the decade of the 1820s is kind of a forgotten decade because it's no longer the era of the independence or revolutions, and it's before the Mexican-American War. So there's like a blind spot there in every country regarding that decade. So far, I've been able to work without traveling to any of these locations. Throughout the process, I have found, with the help of my director, that two lenses are particularly interesting. for this topic. One is a cultural lens, understanding the role of the rumor or the gossip in this period. So I'm learning that gossip or rumor was a tool of the diplomats of the time. It was a source of value for them to find rumors and to transmit them, to basically keep earning their keep in their assignments wherever they were, because they were always listening for rumors. So the rumor appears to be a tool of the diplomats of the time. And I'm refining my topic into two examples of rumors during this time. One example is that apparently it was a rumor about the French designs in Cuba after the defeat of Waterloo. France was at a really low level, but then slowly but surely over the next 5 years after Waterloo, there were some aggressive officials in the French government that really wanted to take back some of the preeminence of France in the world, and they had designs in Cuba, and it was that rumor that led to a series of exchanges that ultimately led to the issuing of the Monroe Doctrine. So one example of a rumor is that. The other example is how Simón Bolívar, in his struggle to get the independence of Gran Colombia recognized by Spain and basically stop the war that continued in the Caribbean after the liberation of the land of the continent, he used the threat of the Armada or the expedition against Cuba as a bluff, he wanted to spark the rumor, and he didn't want apparently to really execute on that because he didn't want to create another Haiti with a racial war. So that's another example of rumor. So I'm working on exploring the cultural lens and use the rumor as a tool. That's one lens that I'm working on. The other lens is the lens of connected history, which really allows me to take a look at all the connections between the peripheries, the centers of power, and examine how the local conditions dictated the positions of these diplomats and their actions at specific moments in time. For example, why did Simón Bolívar trigger the rumor, but eventually how that Armada project failed in 1826 through different factors. One was the opposition of the United States, but also one was the very precarious situation in Gran Colombia. So connecting the local conditions in the peripheries through a common thread or process like this independence movements, the efforts of the United States to keep controlling Cuba, the interest in Spain, from Spain, Britain, France. So a way to connect all these dots through a connected lens is also what I'm working on. Once that I narrow further the topic, then what I'm thinking at this point in time, my process is where I am in the process is that I may narrow it down to a selection or a collection of letters representing this difference of this different centers of power. For example, some official letters from Henry Clay, who was the Secretary of State in 1826, in which he directly opposed that project against Cuba. So that document could be one example of a letter. Another example of a letter could be the instructions that Simón Bolívar gave to the delegates to the Panama Congress, indicating that he did not want the project, the Armada, to be launched because he didn't want to create another Haiti. And this is against all the promises that he had made to the different interested people of interest, especially the Cubans that wanted to have this Armada. So find a collection of letters. Most of them could be available online. Some of them I may need to travel to a specific location to find them. But that's I'm not there yet. But if I narrow the research to those documents, I may not be able to need I may not need to travel to the location. So that's where I am.
All right, great. And so actually, Jen asked a question in the comment, which we've touched on a little bit, but so there was a continuation from your capstone at SNHU or at least a connection to the research that you're conducting for your dissertation. Do you recommend that students stick with the topic that they used in their capstone if they're applying for a PhD program, or do you think there would be any reason not to do that?
I think that the approach that worked for me was to be flexible. If you're passionate about a topic and you think that there are some angle that still needs to be investigated, like any topic in history, it all depends on the question of research. If you change the question of research about a topic that it may have been discussed at length by every historian up to this point, but you look at it differently, you may find a completely different project or a different set of materials or sources, or you can look at the same sources, but ask these different questions and find additional information or a new contribution. So I will keep it flexible. What is important is that you're passionate about it, because you are going to invest several hours, several days, several years researching this. In my case, the common thread between my capstone project in the master and my project at the dissertation was this view about how the peripheries were influenced, and if possible, how they influence the processes, political, social, at the centers of power. So with that lens, from the American Revolution, I was able to find another moment in time with the Monroe Doctrine, and I was interested in looking at a process where the different perspectives, hopefully with historiography from the different countries, could have a different story to tell about a specific moment in time, the Monroe Doctrine, and it is fascinating. It connects the processes in France, the process in Spain, who was in turmoil after the War of Independence against France, and then Ferdinand VII comes back to power and invites back France to Spain. The process in the United States, the status quo in Cuba, the efforts from Mexico and Colombia to really gain some security in their fledgling republics, because they still had Cuba as a thorn in the midst of the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. So that way of looking at a process from different perspectives is what connected me between the master and the PhD. So it really depends. If you find that your topic is interesting enough and has not been explored in some way, or you think that you could read a lot more about it and learn more about it, or you have a different question that has not been answered before, I will stick to the same topic, but keep it flexible. And if in your adventures you find something new, like in my case, I changed my topic, because before this visit to the Smithsonian in December 2022, I was still thinking that I could explore more. How was the economic debt that the United States had with the French Bourbon monarchy, but also with Spain, recognized or not, and where there had been any efforts to recognize it or not. But I really thought with the American-Spanish War in 1898, any efforts from the previous generations of politicians to have this debt recognized was already lost, because of the efforts to legitimize that war and get control of Cuba finally. So it was like a very dry or very not promising topic to investigate. But then I fortunately found the Monroe Doctrine, and it really checked all the boxes. Something that could be visited from the point of view of different peripheries in different languages, and with all kinds of networks of mutual influences. And it has been a wonderful, because I didn't really know that there had been this project to liberate Cuba. I never knew about it. It turns out that a lot has been written about it, but the opportunity to visit it through the cultural lens of the rumor has not been done, not that I have found so far. And looking at this period in a connected way, connecting all the different points, has not been done either. So I will keep it flexible and see what you find in your readings, in the same topic or otherwise.
Yeah, and that's pretty common for doctoral students, is that, as I mentioned before, you'll want to have a topic in mind when you do the initial application, but generally the topic and specifically the research question that you're asking about the topic probably will change a bit over time. It's pretty rare that a dissertation develops directly out of a capstone or an MA thesis, depending on where you are. Different schools call it different things. Some places call it thesis. SNH, a capstone. So, it's actually pretty rare that your doctoral program would simply be, I'm going to expand on the capstone that I already wrote. Generally, there's really not much point in doing that, because your capstone already made your argument, you already made the point. So it's not really expanding, filling in details and making it longer. Generally is not what professors are going to want in a PhD program. They're going to want you to take it in a new direction. Now, the topic may not change, but again, the emphasis will. Jose just made a really good example of how that changed. In my experience, when I was working on my MA degree, my MA thesis was on California's failure to ratify the 14th and 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution after the Civil War during the Reconstruction period. California just didn't do it. We hear about California being, the great liberal state, but they were not looking to establish equal rights for all races in California after the Civil War. So California did not ratify those amendments. And so I had assumed when I went into PhD, and I said in my application that I'm probably going to stick with Reconstruction. I'll just probably expand my scope, maybe not focus just on California for these two amendments, but look at maybe Reconstruction in the American West or something along those lines. But again, I wasn't really quite sure. And then luckily, one of the professors at Ohio State really liked my application. She liked the thesis, and so she got me in. And then we had kind of a very long conversation over my first year or so while I was there to kind of figure out what are we going to do for the dissertation. And so it just required a lot of conversation, a lot of introspection. At first glance, my doctoral dissertation topic is completely different, because I did environmental policy making in California in the 1960s and 70s. So it's environmental policies instead of, civil rights in the 1860s. I was doing environmental policies in the 1960s. But the conversation and the topic and my emphasis, after a lot of conversation, I had kind of decided that the thing that had interested me about California during Reconstruction was federalism. How does the federal government and the state government interact with each other? The state government didn't want Reconstruction. The federal government did, and so it's kind of this interaction. And so we kind of decided that federalism kind of was actually my topic. It wasn't necessarily Reconstruction or even California. It was just the essence of federalism in the United States. And so we started looking around for other ways to kind of tackle this federalism issue, and eventually sticking with California, but we settled on environmentalism in the 1960s, because that became another big point of contention between the federal government and the state government, because the federal government was not imposing very strong environmental legislation at the time, but California was. California wanted to impose these strict air pollution guidelines because there was such a smog problem. And so California wanted these really strict air pollution policies. The federal government did not. And so that became kind of a fight between the national government. So that's the kind of way that projects can evolve. You're not going to, again, what you proclaim on your application, you're going to focus on. It probably won't actually. It'll probably morph. It'll evolve into something else. But theoretically, hopefully, it'll evolve into something that is still very interesting to you. That really is, even if doesn't feel like it's the same. There usually going to be some kind of a common thread there because you've already demonstrated that you're interested in some aspect of history, and so hopefully cultivate that even if the details may change a bit. So, and that kind of every grad student going through a PhD program kind of experiences that to a greater extent or a lesser extent, but it's usually there. So now you've all heard these two examples, Jose's and mine, and then if those of you that go on to PhD programs, who knows what your own experiences will be. So there was actually, we kind of glossed over a question earlier, but I think that this is probably a good opportunity to go back to talk about kind of the logistics of what your daily life is like as a PhD student. So you still have a day job like you were talking about. And so what does your daily schedule look like for kind of squeezing in PhD work along with your regular job? Jen, specifically, how many hours a day do you focus on your dissertation? Sounds like you probably haven't really gotten quite up to speed yet on your dissertation. You're probably still doing classwork and all of that. But how are you balancing kind of work life and your day job at this point?
Very good question. So I save my best time for my reading. So I get up early in the morning, and I find that 1 hour and a half or 2 hours that I can devote to studying early in the morning is equivalent like 4 or 5 when I'm tired at the end of the day. So I really keep a tight schedule, and of course you're motivated because you enjoy reading about these processes. So it's not like a huge effort. It flows naturally. So I read. I have my reading assignments early in the morning. And I have classes on Wednesdays, and I can accommodate my work schedule to be physically at the university on Wednesdays. And then on Fridays, every month or so, I have a Zoom meeting with my director. So this is a good balance so far. Sometimes I have to compress a lot more reading, so I have to also read during lunchtime or in the afternoons. But normally, with my 2 hours per day every day, I've been able to progress in my readings. Sometimes, when I have a paper to write, it could be up to 4 hours of work per day, but normally with 2 hours. Again, those 2 hours early in the morning is for me the equivalent of 5 hours if I'm tired after in the afternoon.
That's a lot. When I was, like I said, at my university, when I did my PhD, it was fully immersive, so I had to be, there. I had to be focused on the work 24/7, basically. And then around year 5 is when I ran out of funding, and they only fund you for a certain amount of time, but I hadn't been done with my dissertation at that point, so I had to actually go find a day job while I was working on the dissertation. It was in an insurance call center. It was not academic related at all. But yeah, I found on my breaks and lunches, I'd have my laptop propped up on the desk next to my work computer, and so when calls weren't coming in, or on my breaks or lunches, I'd be typing on the dissertation between phone calls and on breaks and lunches and all that. So you squeeze it in when you can, and it's difficult, but it's that's what you signed up for. So. Okay, so let me actually just want to check here to see if I have other questions here before we move on. Let's see. Jen is asking, how long was your dissertation? I'm assuming you're talking to me. Jose hasn't really got his up and going yet. Mine was 350-ish pages, I believe. including all of the bibliography and I think including the bibliography. I don't know. I'd have to open it up, but somewhere between 300 and 400 pages. It's generally the for a dissertation. Some folks who are incredibly concise can do it in 250, maybe. Some folks go up to 500 or 600. One of my colleagues, or one of my peers, when I was working on my grad PhD program at Ohio State, I want to say the dissertation was in the 700 or 800 page range. They can get really epic, but again, it's just like any project. It really depends on how well you can stay focused, because mission creep happens everywhere, and so it can happen in a dissertation too. There's some folks, a lot of students. I don't have any numbers, but there are a lot of students who they achieve what they call ABD status, which is all but dissertation, which means you finished all your coursework, you finished everything, you just haven't finished the dissertation yet. And until you finish the dissertation, you can't graduate. But there's a lot of students who, when they get into that all but dissertation phase, that's when things start to fall apart, because that's when they start to lose funding. They have to go get a day job. Sometimes they just they get bored of the dissertation. And so there's a lot of people who may end up going the rest of their lives as ABD because they just can't finish the dissertation. And that's one of the big tricks of dissertation. To end it, because you can't write the history of everything, and so no matter what your topic is, you have to figure out when is this project going to end, and I need to get to that point so that I can end this thing, turn it in, and graduate. So there's some folks that are 700 or 800 pages and then they finish it. There's other folks who will write 1,000 pages, but they just can't finish it, or they'll just keep writing forever. There's one guy I know who's been supposedly working on this dissertation for 20 years, and I have no idea how long that draft is at this point. Or, I mean, it's possible maybe he hasn't been writing at all, who knows? But if he's been writing for 20 years, that's probably hopefully it's either very impressive or it's going to be a very long, disorganized thing. And so, but nobody knows because you never finished it or hasn't finished it yet. So it's kind of hard to say. There's no norm. Well, I mean, I guess a norm would be about 300 pages would be kind of an average, I suppose. But there's folks that are going to do it shorter. There's going to be folks that will take a lot more time than that. So, but that's one of the things, is that you've got to finish the thing if you want to get the degree, and that's actually the most difficult part. Jose, you're not there yet, but you'll see when you get there. Some of your peers will be kind of starting to flounder when they get to the dissertation phase, and it's unfortunate to see, but it happens. But it's also not necessarily it's not necessarily a bad thing, because some folks, they'll find another job and they'll be perfectly happy for the rest of their lives not finishing the thing. So it's not like it's a mark of failure necessarily, or unhappiness, but it's just the reality that some people will just never finish the dissertation, and you can certainly still have a rewarding life without doing it. But from our perspective, when you're talking about the dissertation, there's just some folks who will never finish it, even if they finish all the coursework and everything. All right. So I don't think we've actually discussed this, but how far along are you? Have you finished all of your classwork at this point, and you're just working on the dissertation now?
I will be finishing the preliminary work, coursework this summer. Then I will be preparing for what is called a doctoral exam. It's like rehearsal of the final thesis presentation. For this doctoral exam, I have to prepare a full document of what the project is about, with the historiography essay or the historiography review completed. The sources that I want to pursue, where they are located, what is my plan for those sources, and that's so far what I understand about this doctoral exam. that would be this coming fall, which will be my third year into the PhD, and then after that there will be hopefully 2 more years of the research, the writing, and the submission. So I will say ideally I'm halfway through the program. If there are no surprises, fortunately, with the arrangement that I have been able to build, I have my day job, so I don't see the stress of running against the funds or running out of funds. I hope that the fellowship will continue. So I have to keep good grades in my courses. So hopefully that will take me almost at least at 80% of the PhD. By then I may be eligible to apply to other tuition or fellowships. But so far I think I'm progressing well, and the momentum is good. The topic is interesting. I think there's going to be a contribution, and I have a good dynamic, a good momentum with my director. I was invited to teach one of her classes of American, in her class of American, the 19th century in American history, and I was able to get interest from the students about this moment in time of 1826 and all the reactions. So it's going well, and I think it's sustainable. And the writing is always difficult, but I have found a way to kind of mirror what I had as an experience with the tutors, the writing tutors at SNHU. That was fantastic. That was really a jewel of a resource. So I was able to build similar to that into the PhD. So where I'm trying to complete my assignments beforehand, so I can send them to the different professors without any commitment from their part that they will do a thorough correction, but at least a first pass, a quick read, so that there are no surprises, and see where I am the right track or not. So I think it's going well, and I'm a happy historian to be.
Glad to hear that you're happy. It's yeah, that's pretty similar to the structure that folks will encounter in American doctoral programs too. That it's a little bit different in that in the American programs like the one I went to, the first 2 years will be classwork, and you'll take reading seminars in various topics, and you'll read a bunch of books. And along the way, you will work with your advisor and a couple of what they call minor field advisors to develop a list. And in American grad programs, you've got the major field, which is what you're focusing on, and then usually you have to pick 2 minor fields to develop some expertise in. So that could be a different region, or it could be a different time frame. And then generally, you'll develop reading lists for all 3 fields. Those reading lists are generally going to be you're going to work on that in consultation with professors, and then they will, you'll get this big list of books you need to go read, some of which you'll already be reading as part of your classroom work, but some of it you'll not. So you'll end up with a reading list of, a couple hundred books spread across these 3 fields. And usually these 100 books or so are kind of the biggest books in the field, or they make some sort of contribution to the historiography. And then you get some time to read all those books, and then you have what is what we call the candidacy exams, or the general exams, which are the professors will write a question to make you demonstrate your knowledge and your expertise and understanding of those 100 books. And so generally those exams, for me, My major field, it was you've got to write a 20-page paper on the historiography that answers some question that the professor put together, and you've got 24 hours to write it. And then for the minor fields, it was a 10-page paper for the major field, it was 20 pages with 48 hours. With each minor field, it was 10 pages for 24 hours. And you do it at home, so you've got this massive stack of books. So it's open book, but basically the goal is to, at the end of the process, you can demonstrate that you've kind of mastered the literature on these large fields of history. And then once you pass that, that's the most stressful moment of a PhD program, is am I going to pass my general exams? Because boy, if you don't, that's trouble. But generally, professors won't let you do it unless they think you're going to pass it, because they don't want you to fail it either. Anyway, once you pass those general exams, then you move on to the dissertation phase, where you start putting together the proposal for it, what they call the prospectus, and then you're off and running on the dissertation. And it's an amazing experience, and I'll actually let you kind of based on what you've done so far, just as kind of a leading question here for all of this. I know you're still partway through the process, Jose. Would you do it again?
For sure.
Yeah.
I have no doubts, Dr. Denning. The feeling of fulfillment that I got when I made the decision to pursue the master, and then I got connected by some of the academic advisors at SNHU. I really felt at that moment that I was really connecting with a deeper source of well-being, and something that I had not done. When I picked up our history book, that feeling is amazing, and I felt, hey, I'm really doing what I need to do with this master. The experience of studying at SNHU was a highlight. It was really highest quality. I've attended several universities in Colombia and in Canada, recognized universities for the master, some for human resources. So I had a good sampling of academic environments. The quality of SNHU with the learning system, etc. I really enjoyed every step of the process. I learned a lot, so that for sure was a highlight. And then getting into the PhD, because fortunately I had an interesting topic to present, and I was able to find quickly that there was an Americanist interested. Excellent. And so far, the process of discovery about the topic of research and the different gaps in the historiography, how there were some gaps in the United States in the historiography, in the American historiography about this era, from landmark books about the Monroe Doctrine, I have blank at this point in time, but very very classics about the 40s and 20s and 40s. I have a blank right now. How there was a reversal with the revisionists, and really how they really talk about this, and how that can be complemented, has been a process of being constantly awed about the interesting topic, and how really different perspectives tell different views. So it's been a constant process of discovery, and the writing can always be frustrating. And once that I found a way to avoid surprises by negotiating a little bit of feedback before the final submission, that was better. The first time I submitted a paper, the 20-page paper about the history, I really thought I was going to do better. So that was a big surprise. So I will not change any part of the process at all. I think it has been the the best possible process with the best possible balancing between my life and my studies, and it's been going very well.
Yeah, it's great to hear. And it is good to hear that that you don't regret it. I have talked to some who regret it. Generally, though, it really depends on the experience that you have during the process. My experience was generally positive. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of stress, and it's a lot of anxiety, because that's kind of the point. The point is to demonstrate that you're able to meet all those obstacles and become a professional in the history. And there's a lot of work involved with being a professional, and requires a level of mastery on history and historiography that goes beyond probably what a lot of people even realize when it comes to historians. A lot of folks think that historians, that just means you've read some books on the Civil War or whatever, and you know all the names and dates and everything. But the reality is that, to be a professional historian, it takes a lot more than that. You have to master all of the secondary sources that are written in a topic. You need to know the primary sources that are in a topic, and you've got to have a command of not just the names and dates and all of that, but all of the arguments as to why things happen the way they do, because historians disagree on that stuff. And so that's the stuff that's necessary if you're going to be a professional historian. And that requires a lot of reading, a lot of thinking, and a lot of writing. And it's a huge process. It's a big process. It's a huge obligation, but I agree. I'm actually glad that I did it. And obviously I came out the other side, and I've got a job in academia, and so it's easy for me to say. There are a lot of folks that didn't get jobs in academia even after going through the PhD process. And so it doesn't, not everybody will agree with me, but I'm glad I did it, and I'm glad to hear that you are it's going well for you so far.
Thanks, sir.
So I think at this point, unless you had anything you wanted to add to that, Jose.
Oh, nothing to add.
Jen asked about the general exams, and does every program do that for general exams? It depends on where you are. In the U.S., most of them do. Other countries, it's not. It depends. Some countries do, some don't. Some universities will have different expectations or requirements also. But the description that I gave earlier was kind of general. So there will be some variations from place to place, but generally there will be some sort of exam process to kind of is kind of a culminating experience of your coursework before you start working on the dissertation.
So in my case, I have this doctoral exam coming up this fall, where I have to have this prospectus, and I have to defend it against with a panel of 4 or 5 doctors. So that will be my exam. But I've been presenting papers throughout the process for every block of reading.
Yeah, and then I left out when I was describing the general exams is that, you've got a 20-page paper and then a couple of 10-page papers, and then after you've written all those up, about a week later, you then come together in front of your committee, and they talk about your 20-page paper and your 10-page papers, and then you've got so that's kind of the oral component to the general exams. And then at the end of the oral part, they'll send you out of the room and then debate, and then they'll bring you back in and say if you passed or not. And hopefully, and that's the most tense moment of your whole career, is when they send you out of the room to see what they're going to say when you come back into the room. Okay, I see that Zach typing, and I see that Kyle has a question. Kyle, do you want to turn on your mic? Go ahead.
Sure thing. Thank you both. It was interesting to hear you both reflect on coursework particularly. And, just now, and for a lot of the history students in the room, I'm sure it's helpful to hear about the different kind of steps and checkpoints along a PhD route. And I know you both probably have been tasked in both your experiences, Rob and Jose, with like writing a lot of papers and conducting a lot of research. Rob, you just said something that was interesting to me, which was like about having part of being a historian is having a command of what primary and secondary sources will contribute to your argument more than just knowing like the dates and facts. So I wanted to just ask Jose, and then Rob, you're welcome to follow up as well. But Jose, like being at a couple different universities, what has your experience been like finding the right type of sources to use in your research, whether they be primary or secondary?
Very good. So the experience has been a process of discovery. It's like a mining. You start reading your articles about the topic of interest, and then from there you start finding which are the classics that every historian has cited, and then those become part of your list of books that you definitely have to visit. So from your papers to the classics about a topic, but also working with your director. There's always going to be some blind spots that, unless you have somebody else working with you that has been further along the way, that can suggest other materials, there's always going to be interesting complements, or in my case, definite classics that I had not found on my own. And then the excellent resources that you have through SNHU are fantastic. At the Université du Québec at Trois-Rivières, I was able to also connect with a system where I could find loans of physical books not available online, and I've been amazed to get a book written in the 50s from some Cuban historian, and I was able to pick it up at the university. That was really something very special. So starting from the key papers on your topic, and then you find that there's definitely systematically either a big paper or some books that are consistently quoted, and it's a lengthy process to get to a good list of books that you have to really understand and really be able to talk to as part of your research.
Yeah, and that's another thing that made me think about, and that's a good question, Kyle. The sources, in many ways, will also influence the final product of your work more than a lot of people realize, I think. A lot of students think, I got to come up with this really cool research question that's going to lead me to an answer. But then they start to do the research and they just can't find any sources to answer the question. And at that point, that becomes the point at which you then have to start moving on to, you have to change your research question, or maybe even change your topic. But because a lot of times when you're first starting out, you just don't know what sources are out there. And if you start looking around and you just can't find anything, then you can't do anything, and you're going to have to change and so what I was talking earlier about how your topic changes over time in consultation with advisors, equally, I didn't mention at the time, but equally often your topic will change simply because of the availability of sources, especially primary sources. Because in a dissertation or in an MA thesis or a capstone, your job is to contribute something new to our collective knowledge on the topic. So you can't just recycle what other historians have already done. You have to come up with something new, and that's the use of primary sources. And so you then have to make sure that there are actually primary sources out there that can help you answer the question in a new way. And that becomes a huge kind of factor in the evolution of projects over time. And so that it in some ways, that's kind of an exciting aspect to historical research, is that you ask the question sometimes before you have any idea if there are any sources out there, and then it's a matter of you just then have to do everything you can to find sources. And that's when you start to get creative. What types of sources am I going to use? Maybe you will easily find some government reports on a topic, but it could also be something like where I know that I'm going to have to go find some diaries for, I don't know, legislators in Oklahoma or something along those lines, that's going to take a lot more work. And I have no idea what's out there. And that's kind of, that's just the beginning of a zany adventure right there, is going to find all the sources that can help you to answer the question. And hopefully you do find the sources. And if you don't, you got to be ready to kind of redirect, either find a new research question. You probably won't need to go as far as finding a whole new topic, but it's probably is most likely going to be, I'm going to have to tweak my research question to go in a different direction where there are sources. But that's part of the job, is finding and evaluating and analyzing and becoming the expert on all the sources that you need to answer the question. And basically just reading them all will make you the expert on it. But yeah, it does require you to have a solid background in all of the stuff that's been written on it. Because again, you're adding to our collective knowledge. There's no way to know if you're adding to our collective knowledge if you haven't read every book that's been written on the topic, because that's where you're going to figure out where the gap is that you're going to fill. And then you'll use primary sources to help fill that gap.
Do PhD students often travel to special collections across the country?
Yes. And that's one of the big differences between MA programs generally and PhD programs, is that in MA programs, generally you can stick with stuff that's more easily found. But that also limits the topics you can do in program, because again, you can't go. Most MAs are there part-time, or they're doing it because they have day jobs, and so they're not really able to go on big research trips. For doctoral students, it's a much more of a basic expectation that you probably will be going on research trips that are relevant to your topic. I was in my PhD program, I was an Americanist, and so my research trips were going to other places in the U.S., National Archives, presidential libraries, state archives. But some of my colleagues in grad school were writing their dissertation on, say, the Jesuits in the Andes Mountains in the 16th century. I probably have some of the details wrong, but whatever. But that meant he had to go make research trips to the Andes to go find these obscure documents that were in some church basement in the Andes. And so he was making all kinds of research trips. It sounded very exotic, but also very boring at the same time. But again, you're doing a research trip in pursuit of some sort of historical passion, so it's something that you want to do. But yes, you do have to do those research trips, because a lot of those sources are not going to be available online. They may not be available in English, so you're going to have to be able to translate sources, and you're going to have to be willing and able to go to wherever those sources are. And that's in the MA program, we are a bit more lenient about, maybe we can find something on Google or something that will help. But if you're a PhD student, they're going to expect that you're going to make all those trips, whatever is necessary to adequately do the project. Okay, I think we can probably call it a day then. So thank you, Jose, for coming and taking time to talk to us. This was really fun, and it was good to finally connect, and then of course thank you to everybody in the audience for coming to join us today. And like I said, the audio of this will eventually go out on all of our podcast feeds, and so you're welcome to check it out again there if you like. And before we go, I will just plug our next History Speaker Series event, which will be on February 6th. Karen Sieber, who teaches for SNHU in our public history program, she's going to be talking about some public history projects that she's been working on. She's been working on some really cool stuff with she found an underground railroad site in Minnesota that nobody had ever heard about before. And so she's doing some really good work, and she has done some really good work on the Red Summer and some other projects too. So the registration link for that is floating around out there in various course announcements and all of that. So feel free for that, and hopefully we'll see you there on February 6th. That's going to be at 1 p.m. So again, thank you for joining us, and thank you for everybody in the crowd.
Thank you for this opportunity, Dr. Denning. Thank you all.
Yes. And thank you all for listening. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast or any of our other podcasts, please write to workinghistorians@gmail.com. This episode appears on the Working Historians podcast feed, and you can subscribe to that feed on any podcast app, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Podbean, Amazon Music, Pandora, or whatever else you prefer. That way you won't miss any episodes and you'll continue to hear about all the other cool stuff that historians do with their lives. As always, this podcast does not represent the views of Southern New Hampshire University. For José Peláez, I'm Rob Denning. Be good to yourselves and each other.